Hello, this is Writers at Work, a podcast for readers and writers about the joys, heartaches, challenges, and satisfaction of the creative writing process. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. Our guest on this episode of Writers at Work is Carl Hiaasen, a master craftsman as a novelist and journalist with a key eye for the absurdities of American popular culture, particularly in his native Florida. Carl developed his fluid and always entertaining style at the Miami Herald, where he graduated to columnist in 1985. 3 years earlier, he began writing novels, first with a partner, then as a solo with Tourist Season. Many novels followed, most of which were bestsellers, including Squeeze Me, his latest for grown-ups. Fever Beach is next, arriving in May 2025. Several of Carl's books have been adapted for film and TV. Bad Monkey, based on his 2013 novel of the same name, is now streaming on Apple TV. Back in 2002, Carl wrote Hoot, his first novel for young readers. Wrecker, issued last year, topped the New York Times YA bestseller list. It continued Carl's tradition of mixing humor, thrills, suspense, and the need to protect the environment for readers of all ages. Carl Hiaasen, welcome to Writers at Work.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Carl, what was your beat at the Herald before you became a columnist?
I started as a general assignment reporter in the Broward Bureau, the Fort Lauderdale office. And then I moved downtown and I was a general assignment reporter on the city desk down there for a while. Then went to work at the Sunday magazine. We had a Sunday magazine called Tropic, which was great. Dave Barry worked there, and there were a lot of great writers. And then from there, I went to the investigations team and worked there until I started the column in, I want to say 84, 83, something like that.
Did you have a voice as a columnist from the start?
Yeah. Well, I had written eons ago for college papers for the Emory Wheel when I was at Emory University, and then an Independent Alligator when I was at Florida. And I was always sort of my heroes as a kid growing up were satirical columnists like like Russell Baker and Art Buchwald. And I also, obviously, for their toughness, admired Royko, Jimmy Breslin, Pete Hamill, who later became a good friend of mine. So did Jimmy. It was a mixture of things, but I felt like if you're getting paid to write a column, you can't just sit on the fence and do this on the one hand, on the other hand. You ought to express your opinion. That's what you're getting paid to do. And it started on the Metro page of the Herald, and they hadn't really ever had that kind of a column. They had a wonderful columnist named Charlie Whitehead, who was there for many, many years. And I think he was an unbelievable workhorse. He did 4 or 5 a week, but he was a friendly guy. He was plugged in. He wrote about all kinds of things, but it didn't have there wasn't that much of an edge to the column in terms of taking a tough stand and that. But that was Charlie. It was a different kind of column, and he started it at a different era. So I just went in swinging, and they hadn't really had a columnist like that at the Herald, at least when I was growing up, and my memory of reading it. And so it took a while for the the community power structure to accept that that's how it was going to be.
And what about the general readership? What was their response?
I think it was good. I think people look at. I always took the view that I was writing a column for people who wanted these things said and felt they weren't being represented, and felt that nobody was stating the obvious about what was going on. Miami was at that time, still is, all of South Florida. It was, just a bountifully corrupt place, politically and in other ways. And of course, we had the drug trade. It was cranking up big time. There was all kinds of stuff. And I think a lot of readers said, finally, somebody's writing what we're thinking. They were angry. They were frustrated. They were, I thought, to me, that for me, that was the kind of job that fit my personality.
You have to tread lightly when you're using satire to pierce pierce bubbles, right?
Well, you do. I mean, listen, there were several different kinds of columns. There'd be a straight column, just here's what happened, isn't this an outrage? And then there would be, uh, then there's sometimes you have to just get on a soapbox and scream. It's so obvious. And at other times, satire was it was the best scalpel. It was the most effective scalpel. So, you didn't want to throw the same pitch, you know, every time you were up. I tried to mix up the columns, but yeah, the humorous ones, the satirical ones, were the ones that were the most popular.
Ah, so did the reader response have anything to do with your expansion into fiction?
No, because at that point, this is a true story. I was already writing books in my spare time at that point, novels. But when I got to the Herald, when they moved me down to the city desk in Miami, I got to work with an editor. His name was Bill Montalbano, who was a Latin American correspondent, foreign correspondent, also an incredibly gifted writer. And we had we'd started we started writing about figures that were in the cocaine trade when the cocaine war started. And I did a front page profile of a guy whose nickname was El Loco. He was the first of about 25 El Locos that came through Miami in those days. And one day Bill said to me, after we finished editing the story and it was in the paper, he said, "God, we should write a book. We should just do a novel about this stuff. It's so rich, and you could put so much more in the book than you could put in the paper." And I said, I always wanted to write books, and I'd worked as a ghostwriter on a couple of books. And I said, sure. And Bill, this was a true story. Bill said, the other thing is I need a swimming pool. His wife's name was Rosie, and he lived in Crogay. He said, Rosie wants a swimming pool, and it's like $5,000, and maybe we can just get enough so I can get a swimming pool. I said, yeah, sure. I just like the idea of writing fiction and being able to put on the pages things that you knew, but things you couldn't get into a newspaper story.
Did
So
you?
yeah, so we did 5 chapters. Each of us, we kind of alternated. We took certain characters, we made it as uh, careful as possible so that nobody knew who wrote what. We had to come up with a universal voice. It's not easy collaborating, but Bill and I, we had different styles of writing, but we were, you're toughened by being in the newspaper business. So I would edit, harshly his chapters, and he would edit mine. And we always got along fine. We knew exactly what we were writing. And so we did 5 chapters. And I had called my friend Pete Hamill, who had book published in New York, and I said, Bill and I wrote these 5 chapters. Well, we don't know what to do with them. Do you know they have the name of an agent that we can send them to? And he had a very famous agent named Lynn Nesbitt, and of course, she's not going to read 5 chapters from 2 obscure, reporters in Miami. She had really big clients, but she gave it to her assistant, Esther Newberg, who read it, and about 2 weeks later calls up and says, "Hey, guess what? I sold your novel." And I said, "Oh, you sold? Oh." So I called Bill, and I said, Bill, this is great news. The novel's going to get published." There's a pause at the end of the phone. And Bill says, he goes, "Hell, does that mean we got to finish it?" I said, "Yeah, that means we got to finish it. We don't just get the money for 5 chapters." But
That's
anyway, he got his swimming pool. The book was called Powder Burn. It was the first one we did together. We did 3, and Esther has been my agent ever since then. That was in 1979, and she's still my agent today.
You use the term spare time. I looked at your wiki page, and it says that you started writing novels in your spare time, which you just confirmed. But it makes it sound like a hobby a little bit. I mean,
No,
at what point did you realize that you had 2 full-time jobs?
um, I probably, I think my family would have said they realized it sooner than I did, because I'd worked in the newsroom, especially, you know, I think when I was doing the investigative work, there was not a lot of deadline work because you're working working deep in investigation. There was a lot of travel, but you weren't writing every day, and I missed writing every day, the daily stuff. And so then I really started, pushing on the books in my spare time. And then I think I'd have to say that after, oh, I don't know which, probably the third or fourth novel that I did on my own, this is how the columnist thing, this I wanted story I want to tell you. Bill and I did 3 books together, and then he was going off to Beijing, and it just became impractical. And I wanted to work on my own stuff and work. These were thrillers that I did with him, and I wanted more to do just the satirical, angry satire that I liked. Okay.
Right.
I wrote this book called Tourist Season, and I was in the middle of it. We'd finished a big investigation. I think it was over in the Bahamas, and I'd taken 2 months off to work on tourist season because I had a contract for it. And at the time, my editor didn't know whether Bill or I was who could write because we were writing together, and he never really knew who wrote what. So it wasn't a very big contract. He just wanted to see but the anti-hero, or in my view, the hero of the book, it was a deranged newspaper columnist in Miami who was so upset by sort of the stampede of humanity and the development and the incredible changes going on in Miami that he goes off the deep end completely. And so I go back to the office, I'm working again, and the executive editor comes up to me and he says, "Hey, you know how when you applied for a job here, you said you wanted to be a columnist someday?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And I did, I remember putting that down. He goes, "How'd you like to start in a couple of weeks?" And I said, "Well, I love it, but you got to know something. I'm writing this book about a Miami newspaper columnist who goes berserk, basically mad. And he laughs, and he goes, "Well, that's okay. I mean, I'm sure and it's never going to get published or nobody's going to read it. Whatever. That's not a problem." So the crazy character in the book existed before I did. Skip Wiley existed on paper before I did as a columnist, but people always said, "Did you model that character after you?" I said, "No, I wasn't a columnist when I wrote it." But I know Heath, and he just probably thought, "Oh, yeah, that's just a funny coincidence," but no one's going to see the connection. A lot of people saw the connection.
I have to say, I see in your fiction evidence of your journalism background, not just in adherence to fact when necessary, but in the conversational tone and your sentence and paragraph structure. You move us through vital information very quickly, as a columnist must. Is that the result of habit, or is it a conscious decision on your part to use
Well,
those techniques?
it's both, because one of the things that you learn pretty fast, or that I felt I did when I started at a small paper in Cocoa, Florida, that now is uh, Florida Today. But you don't have much space, and I wasn't writing columns; I was writing news stories. But I still felt the pace was important, and your mission was to get somebody to read to the jump page. You know what I'm talking? To,
Sure,
to
sure.
read past, there might be 4 or 5 inches of the story on the front page, and then it jumps to, whatever, 15 inches, 20 inches inside. But your goal was to keep them reading, even if it was a story about the local sewage board. I mean, so the dullest thing in the world was you didn't want them to quit after the first couple paragraphs. And it's much harder to do now than it was then, because we didn't have the internet or anything, and people actually hunted for information in the pages of a newspaper. But so the pace was always important, and I think writing for the Sunday magazine helped me in the terms of structure, because the stories were much longer. I think there's a reason that a lot of novelists come from a newspaper background. And my theory on that, Jim, is that, first of all, it's the discipline, the self-discipline of, there's no writer's block. You're used to going in and writing every day. That's what you do. Doesn't your newspaper editors couldn't give a rat's ass whether you got a headache, or you had a fight with your spouse, or whether your kid got a D on his report card. They couldn't give a rat's ass. You come in and you do your job, or you don't have a job. And so I think when you apply that same discipline to when you're writing novels, you just you can't really wait for a muse or wait for a good day. So I think it's very helpful to have that background in terms of being productive. And also just stylistically, the pace is, in my view, very important in novels. I mean, you keep the pages turning, keep people wanting to read more. Try not to bore them anywhere if possible. And those are all things that you do take away from newspaper writing, is that you got to be fast, and you've got to get the facts out fast and clearly. And I think all of that. And the third thing I wanted to mention, and I think you know this too, is that a lot of novels you read, and you read the dialogue, and you'll read a character talking for 2 pages in perfect sentences, paragraphs, all cogently organized, and it'll be a big speech by a character. And in real life, that never ever happens. If you if you set out to cover a shooting, let's say, or a drug bust or a bad car accident, or one time I had to, I remember there was a car get hit by a train, and you're out there talking to people. No, people are excited, they're upset, they're talking in fragments of sentences, they're talking uh, the sentences sometimes don't follow one another where they should, because they're excited or they're upset. I mean, in real life, people don't uh, speak in perfect paragraphs with necessarily perfect grammar. Uh,
Right. Right.
Excited, and that I mean, you know this from being in the business. What they really say is nothing like you read in in some novels about how people talk. I think you can always tell when the writer has some newspaper background, or maybe was a cop, or maybe was an EMT or something, because they know how everybody talks.
Yeah, I remember one time I did a piece on Keith Richards, and my editor said to me, "Doesn't he speak in complete sentences?" And I said, "No, but I understand everything he said." Um, and he said, "We should do something with this." And I said, "No, no, no, no. It's got to stay that way. That's exactly how he expressed himself." The thing that you mentioned earlier, that it was so true. The two things I would think about is, if I capture the reader, I cannot lose the reader.
Right.
I've got to hold on to this reader for the next 90 seconds. I wasn't so much worried about the jump as I was worried about somebody leaving me for the column next door.
Yeah. That's right.
And so
Yeah.
I'd be in competition with people who even didn't know I was competing with them.
And yeah, that's a good point. And nowadays, especially my last, few years, the heroine, so much of the product. I don't want to use that, but that's the word they use. But so many people are looking online, are reading it online. Then you have to worry about them seeing a bullet item about, one of the Kardashians got a goiter, and all of a sudden, 90% of your readership is jumping over to read the story about the goiter. I mean, the competition now for readers' attention, I think, is much more intense than it was back when you just had the physical newspaper in your hand.
Uh, Perhaps it's the nature of satire or humor in print, but I really get a sense that you enjoy teasing us. You lead us to a point and then you veer off. As I was reading Squeeze Me, for example, I kept thinking, I'm sure I know what's happened, but I really need him to tell me that I'm right. But at the same time, I really enjoyed the tease. Am I reading too much into this, or is that?
No, no, I try. That there are times you do sort of a slow reveal, or a sly reveal. Um, on those rare occasions where I actually know where the plot is going, uh, I can do that, and I enjoy doing that. And then there are times, and this is so selfish, and I do think writing novels is a fairly selfish enterprise, in the sense that I don't know any really, really good novelists who don't write for themselves first. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
I mean, it's therapeutic. There's a reason each of us writes the way we do, and if I'm not saying I'm laughing at my own work because I don't really, but there's a voice in me aside, so that's a funny line or that's not. But when you're sort of on this obsessive bender, um, you have to have enough confidence. You have to have enough confidence in that sentence to let it to finish it and move on to the next one. And I so once in a while I'll go off on these riffs in the novels, but to do backstory, let's say of a character that you don't know much about, and um, and there's always a point to those. I mean, they're supposed to be funny, yeah, but it's also part of the commentary and part of the mix as to why I'm doing this. And I mean, I don't want it to be slapstick ever. I guess so. I want to give even the the bad guys or the you know some of even the lesser characters to give them backstory because everybody has it. And this is another thing I think you bring from a newspaper background. If you interview someone in prison or in jail, and they might have done something horrible, uh, and you're sitting there in the cell with them, in the interview area or something, and you realize that yeah, yeah, that was a horrible thing he did, but then they'll do something like, and it's simplistic, but I'm just giving you an example. They'll be talking about on one hand about some horrible crime, and then they'll be talking about their dog. It'll be a story that you could hear in any diner talking to anyone bragging about their dog. And it's coming out of it, and you're going, well, at least he likes his dog. But I mean, you think, you
Right.
just think there's no pure evil, there's no pure good. It's everybody's kind of they got a reason for the way they are, and you I want to bring that dimension. And so sometimes the plot and the pacing of the novels, I'll take a pause just shortly, a short one usually, just to do some backstory on a character that is interesting to me, and I'm hope is interesting to the readers.
Now, you talked about beautifully about the dichotomy of serving the reader's needs, but writing what you want to write for yourself.
Right.
And once you kind of figure out that, you've got something, I think. And
Well,
that,
I never wanted to be, and I'm not putting down anyone who does this because I don't have the discipline and really the energy to do it. I mean, and I have friends that do it very well that will write a novel a year, and they'll write, and they have, many of them have recurring characters, detective kind of characters, male or female, or recurring heroines, and they're like, I mean, they're so disciplined. They know what day every year they're starting the novel. They know what day they're finishing the novel, and they know from the first sentence how it's going to end. And I can't. I would get honestly bored. I mean, my brain would get bored because I'm still probably like you are. I don't know how many papers I read online every day, but I look at a lot of them. Something's always pissing me off. Something always makes me laugh. Something always looks funny to me. That's something I might use in a book. I mean, I'm constantly. I'm. I want the freedom to be able uh, to 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 change the plot if I want, or to get rid of a character who's not working. I don't. I think if I got locked in like that, and the pressure that the publisher is waiting for a brand new manuscript every year, it would take the fun out of it for me. I just and I realize that it's a different kind of skill set to do what they do.
yeah, I mean, you could be in a Carl Hiaasen cover band if you wanted to be, uh, or you could be an improviser. You could play what you want to play. And I certainly get the sense from your work that you're improvising quite a bit, and,
Yes.
and it's within the structure, and I find it delightful. I love when as a reader, and maybe this is an author reading, but a lot of times I'll leave the story and just think, wow, boy, that was really great. He must have had a great time doing that.
Yeah, and I think, Jim, at some level, I am, but I also am. I think, like a lot of writers, I'm extremely self-critical, And for instance, I have a I have a hard time going back and reading even little sections of old of the novels I've already written going back years. And because I'm editing in my head, I'll see a piece of dialogue that I'll think, oh, I could have done better with that. I'll see a
Uh-huh.
transition that seems a little rocky. I'll see an adjective that pisses me off. I'll go, what? I'm saying to myself, why did I use this? And this is a book I could have written 20 years ago, and I'm still mad at myself.
Yeah.
But I think if you care about the language and words and everything, that's what you do. I mean, I think you're pretty tough on yourself. I was when I was writing the column, and I was when I was writing for the Herald. I was probably harder on myself, and I was lucky to have some great editors, but I I was always agonizing till deadline about one word or one. I mean, I just couldn't let it go. I knew that it could be better, and I don't. I mean, I bet maybe some kind of a disorder, but I think here's another benefit of, and what I'm talking about, if coming from a big newspaper. When I turn in a manuscript, for example, or even if I turn in 5 or 10 chapters of a manuscript I'm working on, it's clean.
Yeah.
In other words, there isn't a lot of copy editing. It's clean. There's not a lot of mistakes. There's not a lot of typos. I mean, and editors are so ecstatic. Oh, they're so clean. And I'm thinking, well, who in this age with word programs and all kinds of stuff is turning in ragged copy? There's no or with the typos and misspellings, but it drives me nuts.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Echoes in particular.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Carl, I've actually thought about editing copy while I was reading at a bookstore. And I think part of that has to do is that we got better. Somehow over the 18 months between submission and publication, we would have done it not just differently, but we would have done it better.
That's exactly the sensation that I got. That's one reason I don't like to do readings on new books. But when Apple and Bill Lawrence decided they wanted to do Bad Monkey as a series, uh, and I hadn't read it since I wrote the book, and which was, I think, I want to say 2011, maybe 2013, maybe 11. Anyway, it's been a while since I'd read the book, and they had a writer's room that was working on scripts for it's a 10 episode series, and I knew it was going to have to be, just by the nature of the broadcast and the format, it was going to have to differ from the book in some ways. And there were going to be plot lines extended, and there were going to be characters probably would pan out a little differently than they did in the novel. I was aware of that. I understand the difficulty of adapting books, especially mine. So, but I had to go back and read it, and I was so nervous. And here's what I found. I read, yes, I almost was editing from a actually printed copy of the book. I was actually making marks. The other thing was I would sometimes hit a paragraph and actually hear myself saying, well, that's not bad. I mean,
Uh,
I don't know whether I'm getting more mellow. I actually, when I finished the book, I didn't hate it. And that's not usually my reaction.
right. I wanted to ask you about the YA books. You've got a toolbox and you use it in a certain way for adults.
Yeah.
How do the application of those tools change when you're writing for young readers?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was so nervous about doing that. It wasn't my idea to start writing for young readers. There was an editor in New York, and who wanted me to try it. And at the time, my stepson at the time and my nieces and nephews were all, I want to say, maybe 11, 12, 10, 11, 12. And obviously, I felt pretty strongly they were too young to see the grown up novels. I didn't want to give them a copy of Striptease at age 11. Uh, I mean,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
probably wouldn't have affected them at all. But at the time, I did feel like no. So the reason I started was because well, I'll have a book at least I can give to the kids in my family. and they'll know what I do for a living. You know, so I wrote Hoot, which was basically a page chapter written torn out of my own childhood about these little owls, these little burrowing owls we had where I grew up in Florida, and developer came in and was going to bulldoze them all, and it was something that affected me as a kid because it ended badly for the owls, so I thought, well, I'll just write this story and I'm going to do my own ending, and I'm gonna end this the way I wished it would have ended. And that, again, totally selfish, Jim. I mean, I was just like, but I think kids will dig it. And my editor gave me the best advice. She said, my YA editor, she said, don't ever write down to young readers. Write to them just like you're writing for adults. But obviously, you can't, the language and some of the, yeah, if you're writing for kids, you can't have a character with 3 divorces and a meth habit.
Right.
You got to clean that part up a little bit. But the sense of humor and the smart ass part of it, they love. And the other thing that occurred to me was, and what I found over the years writing these books, is that kids love it when you make fun of grown-ups. They love it. And I thought to myself, I was been in the newspaper business more than 40 years. All I've been doing is making fun of grown-ups. That's all I do. I mean, practically every story you write is about some dumb ass grown-up. So yeah, I could do this.
I think most people would say, well, you can't write about sex, you can't write about drugs. But I've always felt that you could not leave the young reader with a sense of hopelessness.
No, and I never wanted to. And I look, I put them in real life situations where um, they they come from broken families, or uh, they have an alcoholic in their family. I mean, I don't dodge all those issues, but um, the kids who are the heroes or the main characters, at least in those books for me, are fighters, and they're warriors, and they're smarter than a lot of the grown-ups they run into, and that's true in real life. Uh, and 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 this is the great irony, because I'm such a cynical bastard anyway. Uh, is that after I started writing, I started getting these letters, and I get them every year. I don't know how many, a couple hundred letters every year from readers, young readers, all over, not just the United States, and about how much the books mean to them and why. And they might not know anything about Florida, even though the books are set in Florida. Some of them have never even been to Florida, but they connect with the environmental passion that kids have. They connect with the love for the outdoors. They connect with some of the parental situations that are described, and they're the most touching, moving letters I've ever gotten. And they're also the funniest, and they really, and I hate to say this, but they actually, when I get them, they actually give me hope for the future of this country and the world. Because I read this and I think, "Oh, that's okay. If this is who's inheriting, that's not going to be a bad deal, because there's some really smart, sharp kids." And I thought, okay, it's not so bad. Maybe we'll be okay.
Yeah, there's a kindness. I have a 11-year-old granddaughter, and there's a kindness that I see in young people that, frankly, I didn't see in my peers when I was that age.
And here's the other thing. Maybe you disagree with this, but my experience in and in speaking to groups, and going to schools, things, I think they're much more politically aware and savvy. In other words, when my friends and I, we saw these owls we'd seen our whole lives, and we saw that they were going to be wiped out, we didn't know we should go to the zoning board meeting, or we should go to the city council meeting, or we should go to a TV station and tell them we didn't know what to do. I mean, all we could do was, little minor acts of sabotage, trying to stop the construction, because we weren't thinking at a level beyond that. I didn't have an education in the sense of, okay, who made this decision? Where do we go to raise hell? Should we go to the mayor's office? That never occurred to me. But I think kids now understand that there's a political process in which there's a role for them. They can show up, and and I don't know whether it's because of the media or because of the internet. They seem more educated about it than I was when I was that age, certainly.
Yeah. In rereading Recker, I was again impressed with how you weave in lessons about history and the environment, and it seems like such a clever, nuanced way to educate. Um, and the way you describe your readers, one gets the sense that they like that. They're not resisting.
They
Uh,
do. They no, not at all. And I was a little, part of Record, uh, as you know, it concerned with a real life racial lynching that had occurred on Christmas Day. I think it was 1921 down in Key West. And you'd think of Key West as the most laid back, Margaritaville. Everybody loves that. But back in the early 20s, the Ku Klux Klan ran Key West. The whole power structure, everyone there was men, and they were in the KKK, and they terrorized. They were in the business of terrorizing African Americans and a lot of people. And that's a part of the history that isn't talked about much. But I imagine, because a lot of the folks stay in Key West generationally, that there were survivors of those crimes, and there were survivors or you know descendants of KKK people there too, and how it affected those lives, two generations later. And then I'm still writing a story for kids, right? But
right.
it's it was intrigued me because I didn't know that history of Key West myself. I didn't know it. I'm embarrassed to say it wasn't. Let me just say it wasn't in the Florida State the history books that they gave you in school, and I promise you, it's not in the history books that Ron DeSantis's people are in charge of right now.
Oh, yeah. Just a couple more questions, Carl, if you don't mind. Um, is it hard for you to be funny on demand?
Yes. Well, Dave Barry and I talk about this a lot because he's one of the funniest guys I've ever met, and he's as funny in person and casual conversation, and he seems so at ease with it. And he and I both have been asked, you know, when you're sitting there writing, you're writing these lines, or you're, inventing these characters, you sit there and laugh out loud. And we've been on panels when we've been asked this question, and we both look at each other and we both say the same thing. No, it's a grim business. We both look like when we come out of our offices, we look like we just got back from a funeral. um, because you take part of your brain is telling you that's funny, or that's a good line, or people will laugh at that. But also, you can be off by one beat. You can be off. Is it really? I mean, you don't really appreciate it when you're that way when you're writing it. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to go and write and I'll be laughing at the end of it. No, it's still torture. It's and
Uh,
I think it's hard. I'm not saying it's harder, but if you if you're writing like a traditional thriller, Jim, where you do have structure, you have some structure, probably an outline, which of course I don't ever do, but it's easier to get from point A to point B, point C. But if you know that not only do you have to have suspense, but just people are expecting to laugh on every page, that's a real tight wire. That's a tough thing to put off. You got to know when to hit the gas on the thriller aspect of it, and then back off a little to be funny. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, sure.
You can go too much either way.
No. Do you miss writing a newspaper column?
Well, some days I do. You know, uh, I do. I guess what saddens me the most is that uh, what's happened to daily newspapers and the shrinking of the circulation and the readership and everything else. And it got for me to the point I could have kept going, but I was almost 46 years at that paper. I mean, that's sickness. Who stays anywhere that long? You know, I mean, but to me, it felt like I was writing for a smaller and smaller audience because the circulation was, as it is all over the country for papers, is going down. And I felt that was putting in a lot of work. And, it got to the point where if I posted something Facebook, and I didn't do that very often, and I still don't necessarily. But I'd have more people would see it some days than would see the newspaper column. And I thought,
Right. Right.
I thought, Jesus, and as also as I got older, I wanted to have a little more time, for family and for personal life. And even though I was only doing one column a week, uh, it it's on your brain more than one day a week. And
Sure.
I just felt like, I inflicted enough on the readers of South Florida, but I do miss it on certain days. Right after I retired in 2021, all the all the Matt Gaetz stuff broke, his little Venmo operation for trolling for young women broke, and then I thought, well, yeah, now that's like a slow pitch down the middle of the plate, and I'm not there to take a swing at it. You know, I that was one of the times where I wished I'd had a column.
Our guest today on Writers at Work has been Carl Hiaasen, who leaves us laughing and thinking as always. Carl, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Okay, we'll see you later.
Take
Take care.
care.
Bye-bye. Writers at Work is a production of Bliss Publications. Erin Mitchell is our producer. Music is by Joni Mitchell, performed by Keith Jarrett. For more, see writersatworkpodcast.com. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. Until next time, happy reading.